We often assume we know exactly what the family dog sees,
Right.
like when they're staring super intently at a tennis ball or maybe chasing a squirrel that honestly we can barely even spot way up on the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
But today, we're doing a deep dive. We've got a stack of high-level veterinary research, this is pure science stuff, to find out just how fundamentally different their world actually looks.
It really is a crucial distinction to make. Our mission today is basically to dissect the fundamentals. We're talking anatomy, optics, the functional abilities of the canine visual system,
Right.
and really move beyond those old kind of anecdotal beliefs like the classic dogs are totally colorblind myth. We want to get to the pure scientific fact.
You get past the myths.
Exactly. So you, the listener, can walk away with a scientifically grounded picture of the world through a dog's eyes.
And that move beyond myth is so important because what these sources show is that the dog's visual system, it isn't just, a fuzzy gray version of what we see.
Not at all.
It is, in fact, a highly specialized piece of biological kit. It reflects millions of years of adaptation to very specific needs, environmental needs, behavioral needs.
Like hunting, vigilance.
Exactly. Hunting, vigilance, surviving in dim light, wide open spaces. The dog's eye is really engineered for survival, much more than, say, performing complex tasks in bright daylight like we do.
Which means the way they actually process light and movement and color is fundamentally different from ours. So we're going to use those comparisons, human versus dog, to hopefully deliver some real aha moments for you today.
Okay, sounds good. Where do we start?
Let's start right at the bottom. The absolute biological foundation of dog sight. How they handle light. Or, maybe more accurately, how they handle the scarcity of light.
Okay, scarcity of light. So the core takeaway I got from the source material here is that dogs are biologically just designed to excel in dim light. You know, those conditions where our human sight starts to struggle and pretty quickly just gives up.
That's spot on. It's a massive evolutionary advantage, especially if you're a predator active around dusk or dawn.
Right, the crepuscular hunters.
Precisely. And when we say designed for dim light, we're not just talking vaguely. It's a measurable, objective advantage. It's baked right into their retinal structure.
Okay, how measurable?
Well, the data shows the minimum threshold for light perception in dogs is roughly 3 times lower than it is for us humans.
3 times lower, wow.
Yeah. They can actually utilize incredibly low levels of illumination that to us would seem like total darkness.
So if we need like 3 units of light to see something, a dog only needs 1 unit.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And this capability, it starts right at the retina. The central part of the dog retina is just fundamentally dominated by rods.
Rods.
Yeah.
Those are the low light specialists, right? Not the color ones.
Exactly. Rods are the photoreceptors responsible for vision and dim light. They're great at detecting movement, peripheral awareness.
Yeah.
But yeah, they don't process color.
Which is kind of the inverse of our central retina, the fovea, which is packed with cones for high detail color vision during the day.
Precisely the inverse. So because dogs have this predominance of rods, those cells contain a really high concentration of rhodopsin.
Rhodopsin, the visual pigment.
That's the one, the pigment sensitive to low light. This intense concentration makes their eyes highly sensitive overall. It lets them absorb significantly different wavelengths and levels of illumination compared to us. The rods are really the workhorses of their visual system, especially in the dark.
Okay, so high rod density is advantage number 1 in the dark. But then there's the second and maybe more famous adaptation, the tapetum lucidum.
Ah, yes, the tapetum.
That's the thing that gives them that eerie green or yellow eye shine in photos, or when a headlight hits them at night, right?
That's exactly it. That reflective layer sitting just behind the retina. It's, as you said, a brilliant piece of biological engineering. It's essentially a mechanism for light recycling.
Light recycling. Walk us through how that works. It sounds like it's literally giving the photoreceptors a second chance at catching the light.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. A second chance, a double look. The tapetum lucidum acts like a little internal mirror positioned right behind the retina.
Okay.
So any light that passes through the retina the first time without getting captured by a rod or a cone, well, it doesn't just get lost. It hits the tapetum.
And bounces back.
And bounces right back through the retina a second time. This gives those photoreceptors a crucial second opportunity to capture that photon.
And this effect is pretty significant, right? I remember the sources mentioning just how much more light gets reflected compared to our eyes.
Oh, it's hugely significant. Studies suggest the tapetum reflects something like 130 times more light than our non-reflective human fundus, the back of our eye.
130 times.
Yeah, it's a massive increase in light utilization, and that's what provides that spectacular vision enhancement in dim light. But There's always a trade-off in biology, isn't there?
Ah, okay. Here comes the compromise. This is where we need to dig in. If this tapetum thing is so great for low light, why don't we have it? Is the trade-off in visual clarity, like sharpness, really that bad?
That is the core evolutionary trade-off, yes. And the answer seems to be yes. The acuity penalty is significant enough that it wasn't selected for in primates like us, whose visual needs are just totally different. Focused on detail, color.
So what's the penalty? How does it reduce clarity?
Well, think about it. While the tapetum maximizes the chance of light capture, that process of reflection inevitably causes light scattering.
Scattering. Like the light gets fuzzier on the way back.
Exactly. Imagine shining a flashlight beam onto a mirror. The reflection is bright, sure, but the edges aren't perfectly crisp, are they? It spreads out a bit. There's also something called chromatic aberration that can happen.
Okay, so the light hits the mirror, bounces around a bit, maybe gets slightly disorganized.
You got it. And that slightly disorganized light returning through the retina reduces the clarity, the sharpness of the image perceived by the rods and cones.
Especially in bright light, I guess, when you don't even need the extra boost.
Precisely. It compromises visual acuity, particularly in bright conditions where the tapetum is actually a disadvantage. The sources are clear on this. It's a fundamental trade-off. High sensitivity for dim light comes at the direct expense of crispness and detail.
So if your survival depends on seeing that tiny shadow move across a field at midnight.
You take the sensitivity. You sacrifice the ability to, say, read the fine print on a medicine bottle.
That makes perfect evolutionary sense. Sacrifice clarity for vigilance. Okay, so that's how they handle light levels. Let's switch gears to how much of the world they see at once, their visual field. It's dramatically wider than ours, isn't it? Mainly because their eyes are set more on the sides of their head.
Yes, exactly. The dog's eyes are set more laterally compared to our forward-facing eyes, and the result is a significantly wider field of vision. The total visual field for an average dog is around 250 degrees.
250 degrees compared to what for humans, like 180?
Typically around 180 degrees for humans, yeah, so that extra 70 degrees, it's huge.
Wow, that's nearly a third more horizon they're constantly surveying without even turning their head. It's like we're watching the world on a standard movie screen, and they've got the IMAX wraparound version.
That's a really apt analogy, actually. They don't have to turn their head nearly as much to see what's happening off to the side or even slightly behind them.
So how does that break down? Like each eye sees a certain amount, and then there's an overlap.
Right. That wide field is composed of the separate views from each eye. Those are the monocular fields. They can range quite a bit, often between 135 to 150 degrees for each eye.
Okay.
But the crucial element for depth perception, for judging distance and speed accurately, is the area where those two monocular views overlap. That's the binocular
Oh,
field.
it's a 3D zone. And that's where they calculate distance, speed, get that stereoscopic vision.
Yeah.
How does the size of that overlap compare to ours? And I think the sources said it varies a lot between breeds.
It does vary quite a bit, yeah. And it's generally much smaller than ours. The depth of the binocular overlap in dogs can range somewhere between just 30 degrees and maybe up to 60 degrees.
Only 30 to 60 compared to human.
Compared to humans, where our binocular overlap is around 120 degrees.
Whoa, okay, so we have double, maybe even triple the area for really precise depth perception right in front of us.
That's right. Our central 3D zone is massive compared to most dogs. And that variation you mentioned is tied directly to their skull shape, their morphology.
How so?
Well, think about brachycephalic dogs, the short-nosed breeds like pugs or boxers. Their eyes tend to be directed a bit more forward.
Right.
That generally increases the amount of binocular overlap, maybe pushing towards that 60-degree end. So their central depth perception might be slightly better than some other breeds.
Okay, makes sense. And the opposite. Long-nosed dogs.
Conversely, dolichocephalic dogs, the long-nosed breeds, like greyhounds or collies, your classic sight hounds, their eyes are placed further to the sides of their head.
Maximizing that wide view.
Exactly. Maximizing that 250-degree total peripheral vision, which is great for spotting movement far off. But it often reduces their binocular field down towards the lower end, maybe only 30 degrees or so.
So this confirms it. They have this incredible peripheral awareness. Fantastic for spotting something moving way off to the side. But the actual area where they achieve sharp three-dimensional depth perception is much, much narrower than ours.
Correct. Their depth perception might be quite good within that limited zone where the fields overlap, but that central region is relatively small compared to ours. It really confirms the behavioral idea. A dog is constantly watching a much broader horizon, which is critical for spotting subtle movement from almost any angle, a classic predator or guard adaptation.
They see more of the world overall.
But they don't necessarily see the central part of it as sharply or with the same depth of detail as we do.
Okay, so we've nailed down dogs as low-light, wide-angle specialists, but we've also touched on the fact that they pay a price for this, and that price is visual acuity.
Right, acuity being the ability to resolve fine details, the clarity of the image.
Let's switch gears and really get into the hard numbers for that sharpness. Using the standard measurement we use for humans, the Snellen eye chart, that 20/20 thing, how do dogs stack up?
Well, when we talk acuity or sharpness, the data is pretty unambiguous. Dogs generally have much poorer visual acuity than humans. Average human acuity is, the benchmark
The
20/20.
gold standard.
Exactly. Typical canine acuity, though, ranges pretty significantly, usually somewhere from 20/75 down to potentially as poor as 2400 in some individuals or breeds.
Okay, let's break down that 2075 number first, because that's often cited as a sort of average. What does that actually mean in practical terms? Help us visualize that difference.
Sure. If a dog has 20/75 vision, it means that an object a person with normal 20/20 vision could see clearly and resolve detail on at 75 feet away. Well, the dog needs to be just 20 feet away from that same object to see it with the same level of clarity.
Wow. So imagine holding up a sign with like a decently sized letter on it. If I can read it clearly from way across the room, 75 feet away,
Huh.
the dog needs to be practically right next to me at 20 feet to see it just as clearly.
That's the essence of it. Some analyses even suggest the average dog acuity might be closer to 2100, which, by human standards, that's approaching levels we consider legally blind.
That is a truly staggering difference. Okay, so if the acuity is that much lower, what's the underlying anatomical reason? Why the loss of fine detail?
It really boils down to two main things: the density of photoreceptors in the retina and the wiring specifically, the ratio of photoreceptors connecting to the next layer of cells, the ganglion cells, which send signals to the brain.
Okay, density and wiring ratio, how does that compare?
Well, overall, dogs just have a lower density of photoreceptors compared to us. And critically, in the central part of their retina, the ratio of photoreceptors to ganglion cells is much lower or broader than in our fovea.
So it's like fewer pixels in the camera sensor
Yeah.
and maybe fewer thicker wires carrying the signal, less individual data points being sent.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. In the central part of the human retina, our fovea, that ratio can approach almost 1:1. Each photoreceptor almost gets its own dedicated line to the brain. That's how we get maximum resolution.
One cone, one line out.
Pretty much. In dogs, that ratio is much broader. Many photoreceptors might converge onto a single ganglion cell, so you lose fine-grained detail. Fewer individual lines are transmitting that high-resolution data.
Okay, and this lack of high density in the center, this wiring difference, it brings us right to the key structural difference you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
We have a fovea there.
They have the visual streak. Humans rely on the fovea, that tiny little pit packed with cones, for our razor-sharp central vision. Dogs lack a fovea altogether.
No fovea at all.
Nope. They don't have that tiny, dedicated hotspot for maximum resolution. Instead, they possess what's called a visual streak. It's not a single point of clarity. Think of it more as a horizontal band of somewhat higher ganglion cell density that stretches across the retina, mostly in the temporal portion, the part towards the temples.
Yeah, so their area of best clarity isn't a bullseye like ours. It's more like a horizontal line sweeping across their view.
Exactly. And if we look at the numbers, the difference in sheer density between our fovea and their visual streak is just, well, it's mind-blowing.
Lay it on us. How different are we talking?
Okay, so the maximum density of ganglion cells measured in the canine visual streak is roughly 12,000 to maybe 14,000 cells per square millimeter.
12 to 14,000. Okay.
Now, hold on to that number. Compare it to the human fovea, which packs in somewhere between 1.2 million and 1.6 million cells per square millimeter.
Wait, million? Did you say million? 12,000 versus over a million.
Million with an M, yeah.
Yeah.
It's orders of magnitude different.
That density difference is just astounding. I mean,
Yeah.
that perfectly explains the 2075 versus 2020 vision gap right there. That's incredible.
It really is. That much lower density in the visual streak inherently means less ultimate resolution is possible, but the streak itself is highly adaptive for their lifestyle.
How so? What's the function of having a streak instead of a point?
Its function seems to be promoting reasonably good visual acuity, or at least better than the rest of the retina, precisely along the horizon. Think about it. If you are an animal scanning the ground level for movement, A horizontal streak makes way more sense than a tiny central dot like our fovea.
Right. You want good resolution across that whole horizontal plane where prey or threats are likely to appear, not just in one tiny spot straight ahead.
Exactly. It's a perfect evolutionary solution for a predator or a guard animal that needs to constantly sweep a wide, flat field for any movement, especially across the ground. It reflects the visual needs of an animal adapted for ground-level scanning, not for, complex close-up tasks or reading text.
So the visual streak is like a built-in panoramic scanner, optimized for horizontal vigilance and movement detection, rather than a high-definition zoom lens focused on one point.
That's a great way to put it. Specialized field scanner, not HD zoom.
Okay. Now, even with these evolutionary adaptations tailored to their needs, dogs aren't immune to common optical problems, just like us. Refractive errors.
Hmm.
And we're not just talking minor blurring here. The sources mentioned that some of these issues, especially nearsightedness, are surprisingly common.
Yes, refractive errors like myopia, which is nearsightedness, and hyperopia, farsightedness, definitely occur in dogs. And the data on myopia prevalence is quite revealing. It suggests it's particularly common, maybe more common than we'd assume, especially in certain breeds.
Okay, we really have to pause on this myopia data because it kind of challenges that image we might have of, say, a working dog having perfect eagle-like vision. What do the studies actually show about breed-specific nearsightedness?
Well, we have some pretty specific and frankly surprising data points from the research. One study that focused on a specific population found that 33%, a third of the Rottweilers they examined, were documented as myopic.
A third of Rottweilers nearsighted? Oh.
Okay. But even more striking, in studies that looked specifically at working dogs bred for performance, they found that up to 64% of German Shepherds in certain working lines were myopic.
64%.
Hmm.
2 out of every 3 German Shepherds. The breed often used for police work, search and rescue, military tracking, they're potentially seeing the world slightly blurred at a distance.
That's what the data suggests for those populations studied, and it completely changes how we might need to think about their actual performance in tasks that we assume rely heavily on vision.
Yeah, it raises a huge question about how we interpret their behavior, doesn't it?
It really does. If we assume, for instance, that a German Shepherd is visually tracking a suspect or scent trail over a significant distance, but we know there's a high chance their distance vision is significantly compromised by myopia, well, how much of their success is actually based on sight?
And how much is based on their incredible sense of smell, just compensating for that visual deficit.
Exactly. It strongly suggests that maybe selection pressure, when focused purely on other traits like maybe conformation, drive, or even aesthetics, might be inadvertently compromising functional visual acuity in some lines.
That's a critical insight, especially for trainers, I think. You might be setting up a visual task thinking you're testing their eyesight, but you might actually just be testing their nose's ability to bridge the gap created by that nearsightedness.
Absolutely. It highlights the need to understand the whole sensory picture. Now, hyperopia, farsightedness, that also occurs, but the data generally suggests it's less common than myopia in dogs. But even beyond these specific refractive errors like myopia or hyperopia, there's another inherent universal limit on how well dogs can focus, and this affects basically all of them.
Ah, that's the limited power of accommodation you mentioned. Their ability to change the shape of the lens inside the eye to focus on things near or far.
Correct. Dogs have very limited accommodation power compared to us, especially when we're young. Most dogs can only accommodate, meaning change their focus, by about 2 diopters, maybe 3 at the absolute maximum for some.
2 diopters. What does that translate to in terms of practical distance? How close can they actually focus clearly?
Well, 2 diopters isn't much. For comparison, a young human might accommodate 10, 12, even more diopters, which lets us focus sharply on something literally inches from our face.
Right.
For a dog, that limited 2 diopter range means they're generally unable to bring objects into sharp focus if they are closer than about 30 to 50 centimeters away.
30 to 50 centimeters, that's roughly 1 to 1.5 feet.
Exactly. So if you hold a treat or a toy directly in front of their nose, like right up close, to their visual system, it's likely just a blur. An interesting smelling blur, perhaps, but a blur nonetheless. They simply can't sharpen the image visually at that close range.
Wow. So that really confirms the hierarchy of their senses, doesn't it? The visual system is optimized for distance scanning and movement detection, but when something gets really close,
The olfactory system, their sense of smell, or maybe even touch or hearing, has to take over to really characterize the object. Is it food? Is it friend? Is it foe? They rely on smell for the close-up identification that their vision can't provide sharply.
Okay, now we get to shift gears into the areas where the dog's visual system isn't just different, but unambiguously superior to ours. We're talking about the detection of movement and speed.
Oh, okay.
This is where they really shine, right?
Uh,
If they sacrifice that high-resolution detail, the trade-off must be excelling at something else, and that's speed and sensitivity to motion.
It absolutely is speed and motion sensitivity. Movement is arguably the most critical aspect of canine vision, likely far more sensitive than our own perception. Their entire visual system seems specialized for picking up a moving object, often long before they can even clearly identify what that object actually is.
And we have some pretty solid research examples to back this up, right? Specific studies.
Oh, yes. There's a particularly powerful study that illustrates the stark difference between their ability to spot moving versus stationary objects.
Okay, give us the details. This sounds fascinating.
Researchers studied a group of 14 police dogs, specifically looking at their ability to recognize objects at various distances. What they found was pretty remarkable. The dogs were consistently able to recognize moving objects at distances up to 900 meters.
900 meters, that's almost a full kilometer away. They could tell something was moving from that far.
They could detect and recognize movement at that distance, yes. It's incredible long-range detection for movement. However,
Here's the contrast.
here's the contrast. They struggled significantly to recognize the exact same objects when those objects were stationary if they were further away than about 585 meters.
Wow. So nearly double the distance for recognizing movement compared to recognizing something just sitting still.
Exactly. The difference is striking. Movement provides this vital visual cue that their specialized system, with its raw dominance and visual streak, just immediately processes and flags. It seems to override the inherent lack of high-resolution clarity.
So the tiniest little twitch or shift in position at 900 meters is what grabs their attention far more powerfully than the static, perhaps slightly blurry image of the object itself just sitting there.
That seems to be exactly how it works. And the speed advantage, the sensitivity to change over time, it also relates directly to how they perceive flickering light. There's a specific measure for this called the flicker fusion frequency, or FFF.
Flicker fusion frequency. Okay, what does that measure?
FFF is a really crucial metric for understanding visual processing speed. It basically measures the speed, the frequency, at which a flickering light source stops looking like individual flashes and starts appearing as a steady, continuous light to the viewer.
Okay, so if the flicker rate is below your personal FFF threshold, you see it blinking on, off, on, off.
Right.
But if the flicker rate goes above your FFF, your visual system can't keep up, and it just smooths it out, looks like a constant light source.
You got it. And the key finding here is that dogs have a significantly higher FFF than we humans do.
Higher FFF, meaning their visual sampling rate is faster. They can perceive faster flickers as distinct flashes before it blurs into continuity for them.
Much faster, relatively speaking. The canine flicker fusion frequency is documented to be up to 70, maybe even 80 cycles per second, or hertz.
70 to 80 hertz. And humans, what's our typical FFF?
Humans generally perceive continuity, that fusion point, somewhere around 60 hertz. Maybe slightly higher for some individuals under certain conditions, but 60 hertz is a good benchmark.
Okay, so 60 hertz for us, 70 or 80 hertz for dogs. That difference might sound subtle, but you're saying it has some really interesting implications, especially for how they interact with human technology.
Huge implications, particularly, as you might guess, for their experience of watching television or looking at computer screens.
Because those screens have refresh rates, right? They flicker, even if we don't consciously see it.
Exactly. Most older standard definition television broadcasts or many standard computer monitors refresh or flicker at 60 hertz.
Right at our fusion threshold, so it looks smooth to us.
Right. But because the dog's FFF is higher, up to 80 hertz, that 60 hertz signal from the screen doesn't fuse for them. It likely appears to flicker rapidly, maybe annoyingly so, whereas it appears continuous and smooth to us.
So, hang on. This could explain why some dogs seem completely uninterested in TV while others seem utterly mesmerized or maybe even bothered by it.
It certainly provides a strong physiological basis for that variation. If the screen just looks like a frantic, flickering mess of light squares to the dog, they might ignore it or only react strongly when there's significant movement on the screen, because that movement might cut through the visual noise of the flicker. Or they might find the whole flickering experience unpleasant. It won't look like seamless motion to them the way it does to us.
That makes so much sense. Those old videos of dogs seemingly barking at the TV, maybe they were barking at the annoying flicker. They're optimized visually to process rapid changes like chasing prey.
Exactly. Necessary for tracking fast movement. We, as humans, are perfectly content with 60 hertz continuity because our visual priorities, detail, color, slower analysis, are different. The dog needs that faster refresh rate in their own visual system to maintain sharp tracking of a quickly moving target.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, let's tackle the big one. The most famous myth, probably. Color vision. We've established they aren't totally colorblind in the way people often mean it.
Right, that's a misconception.
But let's clarify the actual science of their color world. What colors do they see, and why do they struggle so much with that red-green spectrum?
Okay. The scientific reality is that dogs are dichromatic.
Dichromatic, meaning
Meaning their color vision is based on having only two functional types of cone photoreceptors in their retinas. Remember, cones are the cells responsible for color vision.
okay, two types of cones, whereas humans are normally
Humans are normally trichromatic. We rely on three types of cones, typically sensitive to blue, green, and red wavelengths. That three-cone system gives us our rich perception of color. Dogs only have two. And that's the fundamental limiting factor for their color experience.
two types of color receptors instead of our three. Do we know what specific colors or wavelengths of light those two cone types are most sensitive to?
We do. Their two cone types determine their entire spectral sensitivity range. One type of cone is maximally sensitive to light around 430 to 470 nanometers.
430, 470 millimeter. Where does that fall in the spectrum for us?
That falls squarely in the violet and blue range of the spectrum for us.
Okay, so they have a blue-violet cone. What's the other one?
The second cone type they possess is maximally sensitive around 555 nanometers.
555 millimeter. And that is?
For us, that's right in the yellow-green part of the spectrum. It's also sometimes referred to as their neutral point, because it's sort of the dividing line in their color perception.
So wait, their entire visual color world is essentially built on just those two primary sensory inputs, a blue-violet perception and a yellow-green perception.
That's basically it. Their spectrum is divided into just two main hues based on those two cone sensitivities.
And this is why they have trouble with red and green, because both red and green light waves stimulate that second cone type.
Exactly. This two-cone system means they suffer from what is functionally very similar to human red-green colorblindness, specifically protanopia or deuteranopia. They have extreme difficulty distinguishing colors along the red-green dimension because light that we perceive as red and light that we perceive as green both tend to stimulate that same second cone type, the one sensitive around 555 millimeter yellow-green.
So if I throw a bright red toy onto a lush green lawn,
To your dog, there's likely very little, if any, color contrast between the toy and the grass.
they both just look like shades of yellow-greenish gray.
Or maybe just shades of yellow or gray depending on the exact wavelengths. Red, orange, yellow, and green objects may all fall into that same general perceptual category for them, that yellow range perceived by their second cone.
So how do they find the red toy on the green grass then? Because they usually do.
Ah, good question. They have to rely on other cues. Primarily luminosity, the difference in brightness or darkness between the toy and the grass. If the red toy is much brighter or much darker than the green grass, they can spot it based on that contrast.
Okay, brightness, not color.
Right. Or they rely on movement if the toy is rolling. Or non-visual cues like scent, or maybe even texture if they get close enough. But they are not distinguishing it based on its redness against the greenness.
This has huge practical implications, doesn't it? Especially for things like training or working dogs. If a guide dog, for instance, needs to rely on color cues.
Those color cues absolutely must leverage the colors dogs can distinguish well. You need to use a blue-violet range versus the yellow range.
So distinguishing a blue sign from a yellow sign. Probably doable for them.
Should be manageable, yes. The contrast is there for their visual system, but if the signal relies on telling red apart from green, like maybe certain traffic signals, depending on the design,
They're lost, color-wise?
they'd have to rely entirely on the brightness of the light or its position, top versus bottom, or maybe flashing patterns or context, not the color itself. It makes the task significantly harder and potentially less reliable.
So the takeaway,
Exactly. When we connect all those dots we've discussed, the low acuity, the dominance of rods, the tapetum for low light, the visual streak instead of a fovea, the dichromatic color vision, what emerges isn't a deficient system. It's a highly refined, perfectly functional system for its purpose.
yeah, those factors that seem limiting from a human perspective, poor detail vision, can't see reds and greens, well, they're actually features, not bugs, from an evolutionary standpoint for a canine predator.
Brilliantly put. They are adaptations, brilliant ones, for a primarily nocturnal or crepuscular predator or a vigilant guard animal that absolutely prioritizes survival over discerning fine detail or a rich color palette.
It really hammers home that trade-off. They sacrifice sharpness, they sacrifice color range for supreme vigilance across a massive, wide-angle field, especially in dim light.
Absolutely. The entire system is geared towards detecting subtle movement, often at considerable distances, particularly when light is low. The tapetum ensures every possible photon gets used. The high density of rods provides that extreme light sensitivity.
And the visual streak.
And the lack of a fovea, combined with that horizontal visual streak, as we discussed, is just perfect for an animal that's usually oriented horizontally to the ground, constantly needing to scan that horizon for prey sneaking through the grass or potential danger approaching. It maximizes the chance of detecting motion before the prey can hide or the threat gets too close.
So their vision is absolutely purpose-built. It serves a very specific, often predatory or guarding ecological niche perfectly.
Oh,
They aren't visually deficient from their perspective. They're visually optimized for entirely different metrics than primates like us.
that's the key understanding. And we must always, always remember the holistic view of their sensory world, too. Even though this dive focused exclusively on vision, dogs compensate masterfully for any visual limitations they might have.
Right, like that limited close-up focus, the accommodation issue.
Exactly. Or the inherent blurriness potentially caused by the tapetum in brighter light, or the commonness of myopia we discussed. They compensate for these things with their other, often vastly superior, senses.
Smell and hearing, mainly.
Primarily their incredible sense of smell and their acute hearing. These allow them to characterize objects or navigate environments when they're very close or even very far away, often long before or long after their visual system can provide clear, detailed information.
That compensation is just crucial to remember. If they miss some fine visual detail because of their lower acuity or maybe because they're one of those many nearsighted German Shepherds, well, their olfactory system, operating on a whole different chemical level, steps right in. It gives them a rich layer of information about the object or the environment that sight simply cannot provide.
Precisely. Vision is just one crucial component of their total sensory perception of the world. A fascinating component, as we've seen, but still just one piece of their reality. Hashtag tag outro.
Well, that certainly wraps up our scientific assessment of the canine eye for this deep dive. Just to quickly recap the absolute key takeaways for everyone listening. Dogs see the world with significantly lower resolution than us, maybe averaging around that 2075 mark.
Less sharp detail.
They perceive only two main color ranges. Think blues violets and yellow cello greens, meaning they really struggle to distinguish reds and greens based on color alone.
Right, dichromatic vision.
But they detect motion and changes in light, like flicker speed, with astonishing superiority compared to us.
Much better motion sensors.
And all of this is thanks to highly specialized anatomy, that reflective tapetum lucidum giving them night vision superpowers, the rod-packed retina, and that unique retinal visual streak, which optimizes them perfectly for detecting movement, especially in twilight conditions.
A beautifully adapted system, and this whole discussion, especially the data we reviewed on visual defects, raises a really important, maybe even provocative question to leave our listeners with.
Okay, what's the final thought?
Well, given the documented prevalence of significant refractive errors, particularly myopia, in certain breeds, remember those numbers, sometimes exceeding 50% or even hitting 64% in specific working lines like German Shepherds. It makes you wonder, to what extent has the visual health and perhaps the overall sensory effectiveness of some specific dog breeds been unintentionally compromised? Compromised by intense selection pressure that might have focused purely on aesthetics or maybe on other performance traits while neglecting natural, functional visual acuity.
That's a heavy question. Are we breeding dogs that can't see as well as their ancestors could because we're prioritizing looks or other abilities?
It's a compelling question that the data forces us to consider. Something for all of us to think about, perhaps, next time we look into our own dog's highly specialized, incredibly adapted, and maybe, just maybe,
Yeah.
slightly nearsighted eyes.